And isn't it interesting that most of the most amazing insights that have ever come through scientists have come through empirical observation? And it's the empirical observation that led to the more rigorous science, which usually concludes that the observation was correct.
Indeed. And one of the things, and I ran into this conundrum decades ago when I was in the university setting, because it became apparently obvious as a kid from a farm culture where you look, if it doesn't work in the environment, it doesn't work. You have to have a model that actually works in the real world. The car needs to start, the splitter needs to split the wood, the fire needs to be started. So, and many of those things you can't attest for in a laboratory condition. So what I came up with is I began studying excellence or the outliers.
Yes.
Okay. So-and-so is producing an extraordinary result. Okay. And this person, is there a correlate? Like, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis? What are they doing as a lifestyle? What is the environment they're living in? What is their overall mental, physical, spiritual outlook in life that leads them to these behaviors or away from other behaviors? And what was fascinating when you started studying excellence in completely different fields, you'd start to see commonalities.
Yep. Yes.
And that's the application of empirical observation.
Yes.
So if we're going to produce excellence, let's study excellence and discard all of the other information, because I want to, excellence is its own reward was something I remember Dr. David Hawkins would say, excellence is its own reward. What does that mean? And I would make it even a little more refined in saying the pursuit of excellence is its own reward, because excellence is a progressive state, not an absolute. And we've seen this with a great example, because I always like to turn to athletics. I'm fascinated with athletics. Everybody knows how difficult it is to maybe become a champion in the sport. But what's even more difficult is maintaining that
staying
level.
The champion.
And very seldom are the people who have the capability of even producing that result able to maintain that result over a long period of time, because success is its own challenge. It's its own obstacle. And oftentimes it starts to take away from the lifestyle components or the patterns of success that were initiated maybe over decades to get to that point. Well, now you got to do the tour. Now you're doing TV shows. Now you've got all this money, the distractions that may not have been alleviated in your own psyche now lead you into behaviors that you would never have considered before. And then there's almost a false psyche that's built in. Well, I'm the champ, therefore I've validated this, and you start to drift away from the essential. And you see this in the health field as well, where a person will achieve a high level of health and vitality. They go on the circuit and they run themselves into the ground. And they're like, I got away from my own things.
I've watched them come and go for years.
Mm-hmm.
This January, I'll have been a therapist for 40 years. I started lecturing professionally in 1988. I lived for 25 years on the professional lecture circuit, not only in exercise, but in physical therapy, in chiropractic, osteopathic. I've lectured in medical schools. I've lectured in strength training conferences, massage therapy conferences. So I'm one of the few guys that's showing up in all these different places as an educator, presenting novel ideas. And I would see, Joe so-and-so or Mrs. so-and-so, who's real famous and popular, looking great, doing great. And then 3 years later, she's flat on her back and dead and misses years on the tour and comes back 40 pounds overweight. And then she's gone again. And I've watched them just come and go like flies. Almost always because they're famous for some little tiny piece of the puzzle we're talking about.
Correct.
But they don't have the other pieces. Right?
Correct.
So they're an expert on hormones, but they don't know how to eat right. Or they're expert on weightlifting, but they don't know how to do any of the other things right. If you don't understand holism today, you got a much shorter shelf life.
If you look at people who are in quote unquote the biohacking industry, a large portion of them are very successful entrepreneurs, people that have a tremendous amount of responsibility. are at the higher level, generally on the economic scale, and they're trying to either maintain or expand upon a level of excellence in one area of their life, and their physicality is breaking down. They're trying to figure this out. I'm fascinated, and one of the things that we advocate for is, okay, as I've watched my own challenges as our company Bioptimizers continues to grow in success and the responsibilities and the pressures. What have you observed specifically around people who've hit a high level of success and then they kind of have the golden handcuffs and they're like, well, I got to keep this show going, but I feel handcuffed to it and I got these responsibilities and I want to get this message out into the world or expand my components. What have you found specifically around that the balance, say, entrepreneur or advocate or person who is exuding excellence in their field, but don't get too caught up in the trappings of success that it takes them out physically?
Well, if I look at that from the perspective of my 4 life process archetypes, so first we're all a child, then we become a warrior, which means you have to get clear on what you are willing to fight for and die for. But it's also a struggle, as you know, to build a business. So you have to be a warrior. You got to cut your own path. You got to, if you're in the health field, you got to fight off the naysayers. You got to prove yourself. So the warrior builds the business. So you take your own business history, but then eventually, if the warrior is successful, he becomes the king or the queen. Okay, so you're in the king position. The king is someone who has proved mastery and has a dominion of his own, can pay his own way, and is considered an expert and respected by others. Okay, so once you get to the king phase, by now you've already been on the road and in the life working hard as a warrior, but the ideas that drove you to the willingness to do the work to create the success that made you a king came from a more youthful man or woman. But like you said, by the time you got the golden handcuff, you also have a lot of golden responsibilities.
Yes.
And you got a lot of people after you. You got a lot of demands on your time. You got financial stress. You've got investment strategies to deal with. The size of your company grows, and now you've got more and more employee problems and insurance deals and the snowball
lawsuits, government
regulations. It's like, so what happens is you reach this tipping point where you climb and climb and climb in your success till you get to this peak point, and that's right what Arthur Young calls the choice point. Okay, and that's the choice point where you have to decide: are you going to let your ego make the choices for you, or are you going to transition into your second simplicity? The first simplicity was your childhood. Mom and dad carried the golden handcuffs and all the worries and made sure you got fed, and your job was just to go to school and have fun, be a kid. So this first simplicity, the ego becomes progressively more complex until you get to the king phase. And now in the king phase, you come face to face with this primal question: do I have the interest and the energy to keep inflating the person that built this big business?
Yes.
And that's when you say, do I want to keep being the king? Do I have the energy to keep doing all this stuff? Is it satisfying to me? Am I nourished in my heart and my soul? Or do I want a simpler life where I can actually maybe not have as much money, but I don't have nearly the demands on my time? I have time to be with my kids. I have time to be with my friends. I have time to play, paint, walk in nature, and actually live something other than constantly dealing with the rigors of money and the responsibility and the pressures of demonstrating scientifically or publicly. Someone like Tony Robbins has to be on the road a lot. You have to be in the limelight a lot.
When I attended one of his events, his signature event, Date with Destiny.
Right.
And which I think he's one of the greatest endurance athletes ever. If you ever seen him put on 6 days, it's absolutely mind-boggling.
I don't know if you know, I used to be his therapist.
Right. One of the things I found fascinating that he commented, he talks about the construction of Tony Robbins as a almost a separate entity for him.
Yes.
It's like an avatar he's created. And one of the things that he stated was, you don't want to be this guy. And I saw Elon Musk saying a similar thing. Some of the most celebrated individuals, like, you don't want to be this guy. Ozzy Osbourne, instead of his wife says, well, why are you doing this? Because he says, because I'm Ozzy. And he talks about this other entity that's driving that machine. Yeah. Maybe that's their path in life. And I'm not here to comment or disrespect that, but it's indicative that everybody has this aspect that they're going to, come to realization about at some point. And at that critical element, I think is a really opportune time for people to recalibrate what excellence is for them in their lives.
Yes.
Externally versus maybe internally, and then passing on that wisdom to the next generations to come.
And that's the transition. So the choice point for the king or the queen is the birth. If you choose to simplify and go in your second, that's the birth of the wise man or the wise woman.
Mm-hmm.
And what are they? They're the people that walk around and tell you what really matters in life, and tell the young Tony Robbinses and Paul Cheks and Wade Lighthearts of the world, hey, enjoy what you're doing, but don't let the world eat you alive, because you may find that your success is the most painful thing in the world. This is why Joseph Campbell says most people spend their whole life climbing the corporate ladder to get to the top, only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall, right?